Cool, right, thanks for coming. If we could just begin by getting you to tell us your name, degree, and year of study, as well as your campaign colouring slogan.
Sure. My name is Nick Forbutt. I study a Bachelor of Arts and Social... that is not what I study. I study a Bachelor of International and Global Studies. What was it? The slogan?
Your year of study?
Yeah, my year of study is third year. My slogan is Pick Nick, and I am running on Black.
Cool. And just by way of icebreaker, we're getting all the candidates to answer this. What's your favourite USU production of recent times?
Ooh. I would probably say Pop Review. I think it was pretty incredible. I saw it last couple weeks ago, and I have a lot of friends in it, and yeah, I think they did really, really well considering the time pressure that they had.
I agree. Cool. So are you a member of a political party?
Yeah, I'm a member of NLS on campus, which is affiliated with Labour Left. Yeah.
Are you a member of the ALP?
I'm not currently a member.
Okay, cool. And how long have you been a member of NLS?
I think I joined second semester last year, I think in August.
Just before the SRC election?
So since then, yeah.
Cool. So you obviously ran in the SRC election last year. Can you give us sort of a broad history of your involvement with student politics?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I pretty much started second semester last year. I came to university in 2017. I had options to join political factions and get involved, but I wanted to just wait it out a bit and work out what my political opinions were first. I realised that the values that I share align with that of NLS, and that's why I decided to join that faction in second semester last year.
Were there any other factions that you were kind of tossing up in that sort of 18-month period?
Not seriously, I don't think. Yeah.
Cool, so you're running with NLS. Did they pre-select you for this role?
Yep, so I was lucky enough to be pre-selected by NLS, which is really nice that they've given me trust and confidence to perform a board director role. And
so obviously you intend to continue to be a member of NLS during your time on board. NLS is a binding faction. Do you intend to always respect that procedural? Do you intend to always respect the advice of your caucus? Okay,
yeah. So NLS is a binding caucus, but NLS gives board directors quite a bit of autonomy with how they operate. As I said, I was pre-selected by NLS, and they have given me confidence to deal with confidential information and make decisions on my own accord. In terms of the way that NLS binding works, it's very different to SRC, how we would vote on motions, whereas, yeah, board directors are given a lot more autonomy to deal with information.
Cool. Do you mind telling us a bit about your campaign manager?
Sure. I have two campaign managers, James Newbold and Grace Goyditch. James has been involved in NLS and doing campaigns with SRC as education officer. Grace has been involved in the Clubs and Societies program, and yeah, I think they're both quite experienced, and I'm happy to have them on board.
I think it was Felix Faber that came with you to the information session. Was he ever involved?
He is a member of NLS who accompanied me
to
the information session, but he's not managing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sure. Just taking you back to caucus with NLS, does the NLS caucus before union board meetings typically?
No.
Sure. So what inspired you generally to run to be on the board of a multi-million-dollar student organisation?
Sure. So I've been involved in the USU since 2017. I moved to Sydney from a regional area. I didn't really know too many people at USyd, and the USU was really formative and helpful to make me find my place in the USU community. I've hung out at USU outlets, I've been involved in the Clubs and Societies program, I've joined reviews, and these experiences have given me so much, and I think that USU really should extend to all students and make sure that it can be as accessible as possible to ensure that all students have this experience. I think the USU has a lot of work to do still. I think it should be a fun union. I think it should host free events and facilitate free events, as well as facilitate a vibrant student nightlife. I think it should be inclusive to all students, whether that be queer students, students with a disability, Indigenous students, students from rural areas. There are a lot of students that sometimes feel excluded from the union, and I think the USU has a lot of work to do with that.
Sure.
And I also think it should fight for students' rights and welfare as well.
Sure. How long have you held Access membership?
Since like first week of 2017.
Sure. And how long have you been sort of interested in running for USU Board?
How long have I been interested? I've always been interested in how the board operates. I would say I'd be pretty seized on board matters for the past couple of years, but running for board only really came into my mind towards the later part of last year, and then I made the decision this year that I would like to run, and yeah.
If you sort of had to identify the most important program that the USU currently runs for students, not just yourself, what would that program be?
I think that is difficult because a lot of USU programs do interact, so it is hard to identify one. But in terms of the role of the USU, in terms of being as accessible for as many students as possible, and making sure that that SAF money goes to as many students as possible, I would say the Clubs and Societies program is the most important, simply because there are over 200 clubs. It has a very far reach in terms of the students that it reaches. And yeah, I've been involved in lots of different clubs. I've been involved in SAS, Surge, MARSOC, the United Nations Society, and I think all these different societies are really, really important to make sure that students develop their interests and find their friends at uni.
I guess just extending your answer to that, do you think candidates who sort of lack CNX experience lack some sort of technical expertise which makes them potentially less qualified board directors?
I think CNS experience is extremely important. Board directors need to be able to consult with USU members, and a large majority of USU members are clubs and society executives as well as club and society members. If candidates don't have that experience, I would find it extremely, difficult for them to be able to consult with those students and make decisions on their behalf when it relates to things like CNS funding, as well as alcohol policy and all of these contentious issues that clubs and society executives are really demanding a voice for.
Sure. And just on the inverse, what would you identify as the least important program for students?
Least important? I would say the Incubate program is probably the least important, purely because, as I was saying, I think that SAF funding should spread to as many students as possible. I think Incubate is quite niche in its kind of entrepreneurial nature, and I think it only extends to a few students, and yeah, should be extended.
Sure. In the lead up to the sort of election, have you sought support from any student groups, colleges, residential accommodation associations, staff?
So you're asking about colleges or?
Just in terms of general groups that you've reached out to on campus for support?
I've reached out to friends, people that are happy to help out and join the campaign, but not particularly organised by groups at all.
Okay, sure. You haven't talked to club and society execs in order to get support for the upcoming election? I've
talked to friends who are on the exec of clubs and societies, but I haven't, sought support from societies.
Sure.
Yeah.
The spending cap, as you probably know, is $700 this year. Do you intend to exhaust that spending cap?
I intend to exhaust that. Sure. I think that most candidates would probably say the same as well. That money is really important to go to shirts, A-frames, as well as printing, and I think $700 is pretty reasonable to do those things.
Sure. And how are you raising that money? Have you received the $500 election grant? Are you self-fundraising? Are you throwing a launch party? Yep,
so I have a $500 grant from the USU, and the $200 will probably be going to a fundraising thing, as well as out of my own pocket as well.
Sure. Do you know at this stage if you're using A-frames or core flutes?
We're using A-frames.
Sure. Are those A-frames recycled from a previous campaign?
Yep, they are.
Which campaign would it
be? I think it was a UNSW campaign that we used them from.
Sure. Do you remember the specifics of that campaign?
I think it was Activate.
Sure. There's a sizable number of candidates running this year, so if you could maybe distill in one, two, or three sentences what makes you different from the 9 other candidates running?
Sure. I would say what makes me different is my experience. I've been on Clubs and Society Executives since 2017. I've seen how the Clubs and Societies program operates. I've seen how the USU operates. I think I have the experience and I have the connections with students to be able to feed what students want, feed their concerns in regards to like things like consultation. And yeah, I think I'm one of the most experienced candidates running this year. And I would really, yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking as well in terms of my policies. I've consulted with students. I've developed a full suite of policies that I think are really important for the future direction and strength of the USU. And I would like to see some of those policies implemented. So that's why I'm running.
Sure. In relation to those other candidates, who would you say you tend to share the most with?
Yeah. I think it's difficult to talk about other candidates at the moment because I haven't seen their policies. So I'd be wary to kind of like endorse other candidates or talk about their specific views when I haven't seen their vision for the USU. However, I think that Tom is an extremely competent candidate. He has a lot of experience with the USU. We have been on a Clubs and Society exec before together, and we've done a lot of good work with that. I think Ellie is also extremely competent. She has done an amazing work on SRC already. They're both counsellors, and I think she is always there supporting broadly left issues. I think that Benny Shen is also a really good candidate. He and I had a great discussion at Glitter Gala, a USU event a couple weeks ago, and I think he also shares pretty left values and has a really positive, enthusiastic vision for the USU.
So obviously, as you said, full policies haven't been released. Just sort of based on a hunch, though, are there any candidates you feel particularly kind of ideologically opposed to, or perhaps distant from?
Yeah. So I would say Katie Brown. I am opposed to, as she identifies as a young liberal. I think there is quite a dichotomy between a liberal running for union board, considering that in the union regulations it says that board directors should actively campaign against voluntary student unionism in all its form, particularly when this comes up in state and federal elections. I would find it pretty unreasonable for a Liberal to campaign against that, and I think there is quite a juncture there.
Are you in talks for any preference deals with any other candidates at the moment?
Not at the moment. I imagine preferences will be sorted out over the next week or so when campaigning starts, and we get a feel of what's happening on the ground.
Cool. Looking at the current board, what would you say have been its biggest shortcomings over the past year or so?
I would say the current board has really lacked consultation. I think that the way that the new CNS funding model was introduced was extremely rushed and unreasonable. The USU should be student-run and student-led, and I think that the USU should really focus on developing a pattern of student consultation. I think there's a lot of work to do with open and regular forums with Club and Society executives, as well as the board, like restoring things like breakfast bars, where board directors can be out on Eastern Avenue, talking to USU members, and actually get a feel for what they want and what they want for the USU. So I would like to see more consultation, and I think the board can improve on that.
Which members of the current board do you admire the most?
I think Liliana has been an extremely competent president. She has done so much and really reached out to all different communities and really worked well with board directors. I think Adam and Liliana have done a really good job as president and vice president. They worked together on making sure that sanitary items were in all USU toilets, and I think that was really, really important for them to work on that. So I would say Adam and Liliana are probably my most admired board directors.
What qualities do you think they have? What are the qualities that make them so effective?
I think they honestly just are they're very good at just making sure that each decision is thought through. Lily and Adam take their time with decisions, I think, and make sure that everyone is consulted before decisions happen. I think they've been very competent at their role. They have listened to staff and made sure that staff as an advisory role has been really, valued. And I think that's important for board directors to work with staff to get things done.
All of the candidates running in this election so far have more or less prioritised student interests in their policies or claimed to prioritise them. Looking historically and also to the short-term future, how would you say, sort of, what elements of student interest have remained unchanged over the union's history, and what elements do you sort of envision to be sort of changing about student interest in the future?
Can you just ask that again?
Yeah, so, sorry, that was poorly expressed. How have student interests changed over time? How do you think they will continue to change in the future?
Okay. As a student that's only been here from 2017, I think a lot of what I would characterise as previous student interests is generalisations. But I think in the context of voluntary student unionism that was introduced in 2016 by the Howard government, I think that really changed the direction of student unionism and student engagement with unions. I think that it is difficult for students to engage with the USU in kind of this context of voluntary student unionism. And I think things like free access is a really important step towards making sure that the USU is accessible as possible. But yeah, the USU has a lot of work to do to mitigate those past kind of historical conditions.
Sure. There's a number of candidates running this year's election that sort of come from SRC OB positions or otherwise councillor positions, including yourself. Over the last few years, candidates coming from the SRC into the USU have been told that their activist skills would be better suited to the SRC, to rising up in that organisation rather than this one. Why come from an SRC background and sort of pursue directorship? And in particular, where do you think the distinction lies between the SRC and the USU in terms of the skill sets required?
Yeah, sure. I think broadly there can be a lot more collaboration between the SRC and the USU. I think the USU, in its very essence, can be an activist organisation. Obviously, when it comes to SAF funding, there should be distinctions between the SRC being more of an activist body and the USU being more of a service provider, but I don't think that limits the USU taking political stances on things. I think that the USU can be an activist body when it comes to issues that have a broad coalition of students supporting them. When it comes to things like marriage equality, I think it was really important that the USU took a stance on the yes vote for that, because while it might have marginalised people that would have voted no, it supported the LGBTI community and made sure that those students were represented. I think there are a number of issues with student opal concession cards for international students. The USU took a stance on that a couple months ago, and I think that's really, really important. And yeah, I think the USU can still take stances on things, whereas the SRC might be more catered towards providing the resources to run those campaigns.
Sure. Just a quick follow-up to that question. So you mentioned that sort of the activism should sort of go through the USU where there's a broad coalition of students involved. That's quite similar to something current board director Connor Ware mentioned, using the same example you just did, the same-sex marriage plebiscite. How do you reconcile that, I guess, with activism that often doesn't take off in sort of popular student or mainstream communities? Oniswa did polling for the state election and found that most students didn't care about First Nations issues and ranked those at the very bottom, based off a sort of like coalition of students matrix as a condition for like the USU to do activism. You inherently, I think, neglect a number of other issues which don't sort of take off in the mainstream. Does that mean the USU is inherently sort of limiting itself to certain types of activism at the expense of other issues which might be equally important?
Yeah, okay. I think there was a lot there. But I think if students are calling out to board directors to take a stance on things, then there is a right that board directors should consult the community and talk about it. It should be, like, these things are contextual. It should be done on a touch and feel basis. But generally, I think the USU can take more political stances on things. I think it was really disappointing last year to see that the USU did not take a stance on opposing the Ramsay Centre, purely because some directors were just not informed and didn't know the information about it. I think that's really poor, and I think the USU should be informed on these issues and should take stances. Yeah.
Sure, taking stances is one thing, but obviously you said that the SRC should be the one that really puts resources behind activist campaigns. Given that a lot more of SAF allocation goes to the USU, would you say the USU has any role in actually putting material or financial resources behind SRC campaigns as part of collaboration efforts?
Yeah, I think there is room for that. But I also think the USU needs to be financially sound in terms of its role as a service provider. It currently go through free access membership. That has obviously meant that the USU has had to step back some of its funding and reallocate some of that funding. I think now is quite a transition time where it might not be financially sound for the USU to put all of its SAF allocation into the SRC campaigns. But I do think there is more room for collaboration. And I think, the USU can do a lot more, even just with its socials in terms of sharing campaigns, and with things like the international concessions for Opal cards. I think the USU can really pressure the university a lot more. I think it can make sure that the university prioritises and lobbies the New South Wales government to work on that. And one of my policies relating to that is that the USU should pressure the university and also look towards the university putting preloaded Opal cards to international students during orientation programs. The Western Sydney University loads $50 onto international students' cards in Welcome Week, and I think the University of Sydney could do something similar. And I think these could be distributed at Welcome to Sydney parties and orientation programs for international students.
Sure.
Just going off the back of that, in the draft policy statement you've provided us, obviously might be subject to change. It's almost exclusively service oriented. Is there a reason for that? Do you think that the USU should be prioritising services, even if there is a place for activism? Do you think service provision should be prioritised above that?
I wouldn't say that all my policies are exclusively service provisions. I would say that my policy on pill testing is not simply about service provision, but it's actually about taking a strong stance on harm minimisation and making sure that students are kept safe. I would also say distributing condoms in all USU bathrooms is not exclusively service provision, but also takes a strong stance on sexual health.
I mean, there are political undertones, but they are ultimately providing a service, namely providing condoms or pill testing kits, as opposed to lobbying or rallying or protesting, whatever traditional activist.
SAF money goes to USU primarily for service provision. I feel like I've covered that relationship.
Cool. All right, we might move on from that to talk about transparency. The USU often moves in camera for substantial portions of its meetings. Under what circumstances do you think it's appropriate to move in camera? Do you have any plans to reduce the amount of time that the USU currently spends in camera during its meetings? Do you think it's appropriate to be withholding information from students in the way that the USU currently does?
I think the USU can do a lot more in terms of transparency. I think it has improved a lot since 2015 in publishing president memos, in publishing minutes online, but currently minutes are only accessible to September last year on the board website. I think that's pretty bad. In terms of moving in camera, I think there are certain things that should be in camera, things like some staff salaries, competition over tenancies and commercial relations, but I think there is a lot more that could be out of camera. I think things like the CEO's salary, students have a right to know that. I would like to see the USU become more transparent. but there are obviously things that need to be protected for the strength of the USU.
There's been sort of ebb and flow of board directors who in recent times have been elected and then continue to maintain online socials in order to sort of maintain a dialogue with their own voter base. Jacob Messina's Jacob USU Board Director Facebook page comes to mind. Given that the USU Board engages in a lot of sort of informal deliberation processes, including obviously emails or pre-meeting sort of committees, other sort of things that aren't in the public record, what are you going to do in sort of your own capacity to enhance the dialogue and transparency, both between you and your voters, but also between the USU generally and its student base?
I think just being active on campus, being out there, making sure that you attend clubs and society events, making sure that you attend reviews, making sure that you're consulting with students. It'd be nice to see more consultation between board directors and USU members. As I mentioned, more events where USU board directors can be out on Eastern Avenue talking to students. And that also extends to just like the potential for consultation, specific consultation hours that the president might have that should extend to executive members as well.
Sure. Let's talk about, I guess, one of the first things that board candidates have to do if they're elected, which is to sort of vote in the USU executive elections. Have you given any thought to candidates you would sort of be willing to vote for USU president in June?
I haven't really thought about it much. I don't think it's really been publicised who intends to run. So if elected, I would have to wait to be on board, and yeah.
Sure. How are you planning to sort of manage your time, your studies alongside a USU board position? Do you plan to take time off studies? Are you going to move into part-time studies?
I think that's a contextual thing. I will work that out when I'm hopefully elected to board.
Okay. I guess going back to how student interests have changed historically and until now, one of the biggest drivers of change in student interest has been an increasing number of international students that use it. One of the sort of cornerstone policies of the USU in its 2017-20 strategic plan was to increase accessibility to international students. The last time a major policy that achieved that end goal was done was Coco Kong's WeChat, which is still running today. When you first sent us your policies, they didn't make mention of preloaded book cards.
Yep.
Mentioned that to us earlier. Beyond that, are there sort of additional policies you have that cater to international students as a voting bloc?
Yep. So I sent you my 200-word policy statement, which usually Oni would have access to at this time. I do have my full suite of policies, which will be going live when my Facebook page goes live on Saturday. So you're welcome to see them then. But I think just primarily international students should have a voice in terms of communications. WeChat has been really good. I think that could be developed even more to make sure that more international students are engaged. The USU should obviously support overcard concessions for international students, and that program with preloaded overcards is something that I would be really interested in working towards. But yeah, I just think more representation of international students is always a good thing. They make up such a large proportion of the student community. And yeah, I'm really excited that there are international students running this year. I think that's really important, and I wish them the best.
Sure. The USU obviously has identity portfolios beyond sort of non-executive board directors. Would you support affirmative action requirements for international students and or First Nations people?
Do you mean for exec elections?
For board director elections.
For board director elections. I would have to work out how that would happen. I haven't really thought about that, but I would be open to discussing how that would be implemented.
So you would support it in principle?
In principle, perhaps, but yeah, I would have to. Affirmative action is a complex thing, and there's a lot of details that need to be torn out.
Sure.
Cool. We might move on to pulp. How do you think the relationship between the board and pulp should exist? Some people have kind of raised potential changes that they think pulp needs to undergo, perhaps introducing a multilingual section like Oni's done, perhaps imposing key performance indicators on the editors to ensure, I don't know, quality control or quantity control. How do you conceive that relationship between the board and pub? To what degree do you think its independence should be maintained? To what degree do you think it should be sort of moulded by the interests of the board and, you know, sort of the feedback received from students?
Yeah. I think a lot more needs to be worked out between that relationship between the board and pulp. There are, when I was reading through the regulations the other day, quite a few contradictions between what pulp should be reporting on in terms of elections, and those kind of conflicts of interest that I don't think are extrapolated as much as they should be as a USU media provider. Key performance indicators sound good, but I think broadly pulp editors this year are doing quite well. I think pulp, with its new website, has been really engaging, and I think they're taking a step in the right direction to make sure that more students are engaged in pulp than what has previously been shown.
Would you, for instance, be supportive of like the compulsory implementation of, say, a multilingual section?
Yeah, of course. And I think Oni implementing that this year has been really good. I think it's engaging a lot more students, which is, what Oni should do.
Cool. Might move on to a few case studies in that case, just to see sort of where you lie on a few of the sort of historical things that have happened on board. As you're probably aware, in 2012, there was quite a controversial incident when then Vice President Tom Rowie leaked confidential documents that detailed collaboration between university and police in suppressing student strikes. How would you approach a similar situation if elected as a board director? How seriously do you take your fiduciary duty to the board? Would you be willing to break that duty if you thought it was in the best interests of students, specifically in that circumstance, but also sort of more generally?
Yeah, I think all board directors should take their fiduciary duty seriously. In terms of the Tom Rowie case, I think that it was disappointing that not all avenues were explored first. If there was an issue that was in the best interest of students, I think it is really important that board directors consult all avenues first and consult other board directors and make sure that breaking their fiduciary duty is not the go-to thing. I take fiduciary duties quite seriously. I think it is important to make sure that a board director acts with care and diligence, to make sure that they don't misuse information, and to make sure that they don't act in their own interests or have conflicts of interest that obfuscate their ability to be a board director. But if there was like something that was overwhelmingly in the student interest to be exposed, then perhaps I would consider it. But of course it is a contextual thing, and I would like to explore all avenues first.
Would you consider that specific circumstance in which the university collaborated with police something that's in the student interest to know?
I think yes, but I think there were other avenues that Tom Rowie could have explored.
What avenues would they be?
As in like talking to other board directors and not just exposing the confidential information like Tom Rowie did.
Talking to other board directors?
Yeah, about how to deal with the issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you, so if you spoke to another board director and they were supportive of breaking that fiduciary duty, is that something you'd then consider?
I'm not really too interested in going to massive hypotheticals.
Well, I'm not talking about a hypothetical, I'm talking about the specific instance.
Yeah, it's still a hypothetical situation. If I was elected board director, I would take my fiduciary duties seriously, and I can't see myself breaking my fiduciary duties unless there was an overwhelming situation that I thought was in student interest.
But this wouldn't constitute one of those overwhelming situations?
No, I don't think I would have broken my fiduciary duties in that case.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
I guess as a follow-up to that as well, by extension, if another board director had leaked confidential information to students, would you then vote with the rest of the board in censuring them for leaking that information?
I think it depends what it is. Yeah.
Sure. In the specific Tom Rowie case, would you have censured Tom Rowie?
I think I would have. But again, this is hypothetical, and in 2012,
Okay,
Yeah.
we can bring you to this year.
Yeah.
So recently the USU collaborated with the university and agreed to provide its sort of online mediums, its communicative platforms in order to assist the uni's crackdown on contract cheating. The uni has in the past identified international students as sort of disproportionately the ones who are engaging in academic dishonesty and contract cheating. The USU has agreed to assist in that crackdown. When is it ever appropriate for the USU to collaborate with the university to lend its resources to a university campaign?
Yeah, I think there should always be caution between engaging with the university. The USU should be its own entity. It should operate with its own resources in mind. I think the university's intention should always be skeptical of them. When it comes to this contract cheating, I feel like it's pretty uncontroversial. I would be pretty skeptical of the targeting of international students. I don't think that's a good thing. But I think broadly, I think this specific issue is fine. Yeah.
What about in a very real instance earlier this year when the USU accepted almost $1 million from the university in order to facilitate rolling out universal access? Do you think in that specific instance that kind of reliance on the university is justified? Do you have any, fears or trepidations about becoming overly reliant or intimated with the university? Do you think there's any dangers if that relationship becomes too sort of dependent?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the $1 million actually hasn't gone through yet. That $1 million was from the contestable pool of funding that all student services compete for in the uni. I think that in that specific instance, the University of Sydney realised that the student experience at USyd is woefully inadequate. That's why they granted the $1 million for free access. I would be wary of a dependence on the university, but I think for this specific case, that extra funding from the contestable pool is really important to ensure that access can be free, that all students can be USU members, so that the union is as accessible and inclusive as possible for all students. I think that's the priority in this situation.
So the USU obviously also plays a bit of a bridging role. It connects students simply by virtue of its partnerships with a number of corporates at times like O Week and O Day and such. It plays a bridging role that connects students to those corporations and by extension to those corporations' values, their products, their goods and services, etc. This year, one of the most prominent store locations was given to the Commonwealth Bank, right on the heels of a Royal Commission which found that they had repeatedly exploited low financial literacy in youth following the Dolomite scandal and such. Do you think there should be some sort of ethical investment drip test that the USU conducts in order to ensure that it partners only with sort of more principled corporations?
Yeah, I support that. I think there's been a lot written about the corporatization of Welcome Week and O Weeks in the past. I would like to see, I'd like to make sure that these corporations don't neglect from the actual USU clubs and societies, as well as the SRC stalls during Welcome Week. I think it's all very glitzy and fun, but I think the club and society should be the focus for Welcome Week. It should be focused on the student experience and it should be student run. Just in terms of corporatization of the USU as well, I think when it comes to the new funding model for clubs and societies, I think there are real threats that some societies will have to look towards external sponsorship just to avoid running a deficit. And I think that's why my funding policy wants to address those funding gaps to make sure that club societies are funded fairly.
Sure.
I just wanted to quickly cast you back to sort of late November last year at Rep Select 2. And you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm under the impression that at the second Rep Select, you actually proxied to Will Edwards, who took your spot in council.
Yeah, I think that was right.
for that meeting that was divided into 2 rooms, and you stayed in the observer room. Can you explain why that happened, given that you were present and able to attend the meeting? Do you think it's fair to say that there's perhaps a tendency revealed there to defer to higher up members in your faction? Is there a possibility that you're being that you're kind of acting as a puppet, for lack of a better word, for members of your faction?
To answer that question pretty simply, I had to go to work at 8 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I attended the meeting, to be there, present, to start with, and then proxy to well upwards after I had to leave for work.
Okay, fair enough. Cool. Moving on to another case study in that case. As you're probably aware, the Sydney Uni Liberal Club hosted a talk by Bettina Arndt towards the end of last year, which was then protested by the Women's Collective. It got fairly heated. There were some sort of semi-violent altercations that broke out. The uni then charged the Liberal Club over $300 in security costs. Do you think it's appropriate to be charging individual clubs for security costs incurred by their events, particularly events that have sort of foreseeable controversial outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I don't think people like Bettina Arndt should be platformed or broadcasted on this campus. I think she has disgusting views and just should not have a place on this campus at all. I think the direct action against that was really important to showcase that, people that are rape apologists cannot have a voice on this campus. I think that's really, really important. In terms of whether security costs should be incurred, I don't really have any sympathy for the Liberal Club in this situation. If they're going to host a controversial rape apologist who has ridiculous views, I think they should be incurred the costs for the potential outcomes of that.
To kind of invert things in that case, if, for example, the ALP club or another left-leaning club hosted a left-leaning speaker and some right-wing collective protested that speaker and the same circumstances played out but sort of in reverse, would you still maintain that position?
As in like a protest at...
So for example, a right-wing collective protested a Labour MP speaking on campus, and then the uni then charged the ALP club security costs. Would you still be supportive of that policy in that instance? Or is it specific to right-wing clubs hosting far-right speakers?
I think it's specific to right-wing clubs. I think if it was someone that didn't have dangerous views, that was being hosted on campus, then those views should not, the people that have platformed those views should not have the burden of paying the costs. I think it's important for the USU to actually send a message against making sure that people who have really dangerous views are not platformed at the university. And I think that is the important point here. While of course there is, reason for protest on both sides of the spectrum, and that is important. I think it's more important for the USU to send a strong message about that.
So you'd be in favour of the USU itself footing the costs for those security bills, as opposed to the club?
As opposed to the club.
So if there were hypothetical security costs billed to the ALP club, you'd be in favour of the USU picking up that bill on behalf of the club?
I'd have to look at it if it happened. But talking about the specific Bettina Arndt scandal, I think that was fine.
I think just to understand what you mean when you say like a dangerous speaker, and how you approach deciding whether a speaker is dangerous. A similar situation occurred, I think, back in 2017 when Simon Birmingham, then Education Minister, attended the Liberal Club's John Howard debating grand final. And Riot Police was also called into that event to stop protesters, the broader context of higher education deregulation being on the table at that time. In that case, would you see sort of Education Minister Simon Birmingham as having dangerous views? If they are dangerous, why?
I'm not too familiar with this specific issue, if I'm honest. I think opposing the deregulation is important. I think there should be protests to those kind of events and those speakers. But I think protests should be done in a civil way as well. And we should always try and avoid situations where, there are costs and fallout.
Sure. Just taking you to your policies, one of the policies you've sent to us is that the USU should sort of introduce a rural integration program for rural students during Welcome Week. What does that program look like to you, if you could talk us through it?
Yeah. So I am from a regional area. I came to the university not really knowing too many people. And I think a rural integration program would be really, really helpful to make sure that rural students can actually interact with other rural students and make sure that they just know simple things, like where to go in Sydney and, be taken to like the Opera House and Bondi Beach and iconic places that would become useful for them during their time in Sydney. I think it is sometimes incredibly isolating for rural students at the University of Sydney, and I would like orientation programs, visits to those places I mentioned, as well as parties during Welcome Week for rural students as well.
So just as a follow-up, are those events, are those sort of tours and sort of other orientation activities going to be exclusively for rural students, or are they going to be with other new students at the University of Sydney, international students or first and family students?
Yeah, I think it can be both. I think there can be like one that can be rural students go to visit somewhere or have a tour somewhere. But I think in terms of like the Welcome to Sydney party that happened at Welcome Week this year, I think that could be a collaborative thing that joins forces with international students and first and family, all of those things.
Sure. And I guess how is that different to what the USU V team already offers in terms of international student tours, rural student tours? The USU V team already runs programs available to new students at the University of Sydney. It doesn't discriminate against students participating in that program who are rural, and rural students can participate in those tours.
Yeah, they can. I think it's a matter of marketing. It's a matter of just making sure that you reach out to rural students and highlight a program as this is something where you can meet other rural students who are going through a similar thing to you. I think currently USU excludes rural students. That was my experience, and that's why I think it's important.
Sure.
Cool. I haven't got too many more questions.
Yeah, I guess we'll...
Ready to finish up. We might just finish with one more question,
Sure.
Which is just kind of a general overview of the next couple of weeks. Do you have any major fears? Is there anything in particular, aside obviously from getting elected, that you're having to achieve over the next couple of weeks? Are you worried about any preference deals that might be occurring behind your back? Just your general kind of overview.
I feel pretty good. I think it'll be a fun couple of weeks. I'm very excited to get out on Eastern Avenue next Monday and actually just talk to students. I think that, that's what I'm most excited for, just to get out there and actually hear what students have to say, talk about my policies, and see which policies particularly resonate with most students. I have already consulted with students, and I think that my policies are strong. I'm excited for the next couple of weeks. I wish all candidates the best of luck.
Cool.
No real fears.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for coming.
Cool. Thank you so much.